This might be the most important video I post all offseason. Here are 7 players, the 7 players we need to avoid in every single draft to the end of time. Avoid them, do not draft them in the 2025 fantasy football season that's coming next year. And some of these guys are still top 10 at their positions. So you're going to want to stick around to the end of the video to find out who that is. If you are feeling generous today, please go down and hit that like button. It would help this channel out a ton to grow in the offseason. But I will never waste your time. The first player, our running back here that we do need to avoid, he is going to waste your time. It is going to be Rachaad White. Now, he's never been amazingly efficient. He was 5 touches behind Christian McCaffrey 2 years ago, with Christian McCaffrey finishing as the RB1 and then him finishing as the RB4. Now that might seem really crazy and like really good fantasy numbers, but if you look at the efficiency, the metrics are nowhere near proving that he's going to be a running back that we can trust year in and year out, especially in the next one coming consistently. The reason he saw all of that success 2 years ago is because there was nobody else in this Buccaneers backfield to take any usage from him. He was the clear RB1, and believe me, they tried to put other guys in there. They got backups, but they either didn't do any better or they got injured. Then they go out and draft Bucky Irving last season, give him a ton of run out the gate in week 1 for the remainder of the entire season that we just finished. 10 touches a game out of the gate. And if we see the entire season totals of the one we just finished, 1,033 rushing yards goes to Bucky Irving, 613 to Rachaad White, 188 rush attempts to White's 444, and 5.4 yards per carry to Bucky Irving at 4.26 for Rachaad White. The receiving numbers are a similar story to tell, and the Buccaneers offense was very, very good. They were one of the highest scoring in the entire NFL. Baker was top 5 in passing yards and touchdowns and overall efficiency metrics at the quarterback position, and now they're in the playoffs at a high seed. Like, everything that had to go right went right for this offense and went right for this team. Rachaad White just didn't get any of that. All this to say, he's going to be off of our draft boards for the rest of time because it is now Bucky Irving season. He is very high in dynasty rankings. He's very high in keeper rankings, as well as every single mock draft you're going to see for the 2025 season. I will be doing more of those on this channel throughout the offseason. Again, another reason to be subscribed and stick around for those. But he's not efficient, and now he has real competition in the backfield, but someone that we need to just cut ties with completely, regardless of how much upside you think they could have this season, and something everybody keeps falling for is going to be Kyle Pitts. I just don't want to deal with it at this point. We've been on this for so long. There's been so many excuses over the years. He's out of excuses at this point to be a fantasy viable tight end, and it's not like the tight end position is one that's hard to get into to be the top 10. He had an amazing rookie season, finishing as the tight end 6. Then he followed that up with the tight end 33 in his sophomore season. After that, he got injured. We really can't take that away from him, but then he follows that with the tight end 13 and then the tight end 15 last season. He's not returning value. He never has. Even when he's fully healthy, he's just not putting up those numbers. And the Falcons offense has seen every single coaching change, every single offensive scheme change, like anything that you could possibly say. Maybe he's going to get upside now because this change, it doesn't matter. It's all happened and he hasn't produced. 2 years ago, he was spoiled by the Jonnu Smith breakout. We all remember that and how much Arthur Smith liked using him in the offense. Arthur Smith leaves, Jonnu Smith leaves. You think this is his chance. Even this year, his snap share is not there. He's splitting snaps with Charlie Warner. There is always another tight end in the mix for this offense, regardless of who the coach is. Whatever happens, you can't dominate routes run at your own position. You can't be fantasy viable. Last year, we had the narrative that, okay, Kirk Cousins is going to save him. He's coming to this offense. He's a pretty good quarterback. Look what he just did in Minnesota. Yes, he was coming off an injury. He does decent. Even then, Kyle Pitts was not viable, again finishing as the tight end 15. Now we see Michael Penix coming into this offense in his last 3 games of the season, or I guess first 3 games of the season. He looked pretty good. Like, there's definitely some upside we can see here for the foreseeable future, and that's not going to do anything for us. We had the same thing with Kirk Cousins. We had the same upside all year long for the past 3 years. Nothing's happened. It's setting up for another disappointment of Kyle Pitts being super high in fantasy draft values as the hype comes back around and the offense is projected for a good amount of wins and just offensive success, and he doesn't meet it. And it's not like the tight end pool is something that's really hard to be top 10 in, like wide receivers or running backs. It's a wasteland. Like, being a top 10 tight end is almost a bare minimum for anybody that's somewhat decent being drafted in the first 6-7 rounds. And what's crazy is that he actually runs a lot of deep routes. Out of all tight ends, he is top 5 in deep routes run per game. He's just not getting targeted. It doesn't turn into fantasy points. We have to just cut our ties at this point. I'd rather take other positions at his ADP in 2025. But another running back, though, looking at this side of things, I'm going to be avoiding Javonte Williams. After what we saw this season and his pretty much entire career, the sole reason that I do not want to be touching Javonte Williams is because of the Sean Payton offense. As long as he's here, we can expect absolutely no type of consistency from him in this entire backfield. The problem with Payton is that he uses every single running back in this backfield. It does not matter if you could probably get some touches, I'm sure. The committee system is one that he sticks to the max degree. Now, it's not terrible. That's not necessarily a bad thing in NFL terms. in fantasy terms, it's absolutely the worst thing you could possibly have because there's no guaranteed touches, volume, or efficiency, red zone usage, anything. It just all goes out the window. Last year, Javonte was being drafted as the RB23, likely because of this reason, and we know Sean Payton. We didn't know all of these other running backs in the offense, though, and they still got touches. You look at these guys, we have Jaleel McLaughlin getting touches. Even Tyler Bidet was getting a good amount of run when he was healthy and some good opportunities. More importantly, we had Audric Estime as a rookie coming into this offense and getting a very good amount of usage in his small sample size. He was very efficient. All of that caused Javonte Williams to finish as the RB31 on the year, never seeing, not one time, more than 70% of the snaps in a single game. On top of that, he only had 2 games where he had over 15 rushing attempts and only 6 out of his 17 total games where he had over 10 carries. That's just, it's not going to get it done. At this point, it's less of a him issue and more of a opportunity issue, because if you never have the ball in your hands, you're never going to get fantasy points. But then when you look at his efficiency and his stats, okay, maybe it's both. Maybe it is a him and a team issue. It's not like this is a fluke year for him. He had 3.6 yards per carry, only 4 touchdowns. Well, he had 3.5 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns in 2023. He never finished ever in his career better than the RB17. That was his rookie year before all of the injuries happened. Mediocre guys will not win you fantasy football leagues. They're not going to be the separator here. We learned that last season with a bunch of these kind of dead zone late round running backs that had value and were probably safe but never going to break out, but we drafted just because it's fantasy points. We look, for example, Devin Singletary was a guy here on the Giants. There was no running back competition in the beginning of the year. It was just him, and that was pretty much it. His job was on lock. They just got him on the team that year. It all went down the drain. It completely backfired on him. He got benched for a younger rookie, Tyrone Tracy, that they wound up starting for the rest of the year and is actually a really good running back, but you just never know what to expect with this Broncos backfield with Sean Payton as the coach here. Bo Nix is going to be taking goal line touchdowns and some rushing usage as well. That's never a plus. Yes, he's going to be drafted pretty late next season, but he's not going to break out. Why not take a risk on a rookie running back or a rookie wide receiver that actually has a big ceiling? That ties into more of what we can look for. But here are some guys that are in the top of fantasy football drafts consensus that we need to be avoiding. Cooper Kupp is going to be the number 1 guy here, and it does pain me. We are 1000% in the Puka Nacua era. In his 8 fully healthy games this year, if we isolate that, he is the wide receiver 2, averaging 22.7 fantasy points a game, only behind Jamar Chase at 29 points. Like, he's just in an era of his own because he got the triple crown. It is what it is. You can't take that away from him. He led this team in first read target share. Every single wide receiver statistic, Puka Nacua led. He had a great rookie season on top of that. So we look at Cooper Kupp and you see he's on his way out. Now, he did have some flashes last year. We have to be completely honest. He had a 32-point game to start the season with a 21 target game. Like, that was an insane amount already. He had 4 games over 20 fantasy points this year. By no means is that bad numbers, but you look at the rest of the year and specifically that last month of the season from week 13 to 17, he was the wide receiver 64, averaging 6.8 fantasy points per game, despite being fully healthy in that stretch, averaging above an 80% snap share. So that brings some red flags moving into this next year that we're coming up on in 2025. The NFL playoffs, we'll see how he plays there. If he completely turns it around, maybe this is a little bit more of a slow building thing, but I still think he's going to be somebody we need to be avoiding because his draft stock is going to be so high. But this is a 31-year-old wide receiver that has not played a fully healthy season since 2021, where he had the overall fantasy wide receiver 1 finish with a triple crown, and you look at his totals since then, we're holding him to that standard at an amazingly high level, and it's driving his value up. In 2022, he was the wide receiver 23 with 7 games off with injury. 2023, he was the wide receiver 40 with 5 games off injury, and then last season in 2023, he finished as the wide receiver 36, missing another 5 games. When it comes to consistency as a top 20 wide receiver, which is where he's being priced at, it's too high. He's going to be 32 next season. He's fighting an uphill battle to be efficient, and you look, yes, he's 100% still going to be used, and in redrafts, he's going to be drafted pretty high, but the shots on goal mentality is something that we want when it comes to drafts. I know it's insanely early to be talking about this, but Kupp is just at that point in his career. Even if we look at his efficiency metrics from his healthy games this year, he's a wide receiver 4 in targets per route run. That's awesome. That's like a really good number, but wide receiver 55 in air yards, the wide receiver 59 in deep targets per game, wide receiver 35 in yards after the catch, and the wide receiver 31 in yards per route run. So nothing stands out about his stats to make me believe that he still has a couple wide receiver 20 plus performances left in him, but I'll make this next one very short and very quick because I think it's a consensus that nobody's going to be trusting them and avoiding them at all costs in their draft next year. It's going to be Travis Etienne. He is a no-brainer. He was drafted as the RB7 though. When we look back, it was a terrible decision at the beginning of the year. Then he finished as the RB38, missing only 2 games. Like, you'd think maybe injury would be the thing keeping him out of games and keeping his finish so low. No, it was 100% him and his efficiency or lack thereof that he finished with. Again, the RB36 in juke rate, the RB45 in yards per touch. Now, for reference, so it doesn't look like I'm just picking stats and making Travis Etienne look like he was worse than he really was, we're going to be looking at Tank Bigsby's stats. He was the RB2 in juke rate at 30% and the RB28 in yards per touch. So with the holes in the offensive line and the competition, which is already at the running back position, which is younger and possibly even better, I don't think that's possible. I think it's just a fact. Moving into 2025, I'm sure his draft price will follow that and drop because of it, especially when you don't score touchdowns. We look at the Jaguars, they were one of the least scoring offenses in the NFL. They didn't have a high total. Travis Etienne only scores 2 touchdowns on the year. That's absolutely terrible. Okay, maybe we can blame this on the Jaguars. Maybe it's their fault. Well, you look at Tank Bigsby, he finished with 6 touchdowns. So it's not amazing, but if he's getting all of the touchdowns, all of the important fantasy numbers, then why are we drafting Travis Etienne? At this point, he's just a handcuff to a guy that could be very valuable next year in Tank Bigsby. But Deebo Samuel is also going to make this list, a guy that was previously in the top half of the NFL, even like a top 5th of the NFL. That's not true anymore. Despite having, for the most part, a fully healthy season with the 49ers, after being named injury prone by a lot of fans and a lot of people, he still didn't produce. We have Brandon Ayuk. He went out for the season very early, I believe in week 8 with an ACL injury. He never came back. And Deebo Samuel still did not look good. He looked slow coming out of his breaks. His routes just weren't clean compared to previous years. He may be losing his juice at 29 years old. I could see the 49ers here moving off of him in the near future, maybe in the offseason to free up cap space, because Brock Purdy and some of these other guys are going to need to be paid. That's just going to accelerate his downward spiral if he does happen to leave the 49ers. You take guys like DeAndre Hopkins, for example. He took a big hit in fantasy production after leaving the Texans, where he was a consistent top 5 wide receiver every single year. Then he goes to the Cardinals. He was still decent. He dealt with injury though. Then he goes to Tennessee, finishes as the wide receiver 22. Then in the most recent season, he goes to the Chiefs and had one of his worst career seasons in fantasy football finishes as well. Even when you look at guys like Calvin Ridley, the same situation here. He had decent years in Atlanta, decent years in Jacksonville, turned to the Titans, finished as the wide receiver 30. Guys coming off recent contracts, moving to a new organization to get that last big deal before they kind of retire and start to fizzle out, typically don't perform as high as fantasy expectations and as high as their name value says. Instead of going as a wide receiver 10 or 20, which he was in the beginning of last year and probably, maybe, I hope not this year, we should be expecting him in the wide receiver 30 to 40 range, even if he does stay with the 49ers. Juwan Jennings looked good. Ricky Pearsall is a promising rookie, or I guess sophomore coming into next year. Brandon Ayuk is going to be healthy at some point. But another top 10 guy we need to be completely avoiding, possibly even top 5, actually most definitely top 5, is going to be Travis Kelce here. He was my biggest must avoid coming into last season, and that held true. He finished as a tight end 5. Now that might not sound bad, but he was the consensus number 1 tight end, the only guy that was going in the first round of fantasy football drafts by a good amount. And the reason I had this take and still stick to it for the next season coming up is because 2 years ago in 2023, we saw him take a slight step back in snap percentage and a little bit of usage as well in the back third of that season to preserve him for the fantasy football playoffs. And it makes sense when you have a 34-year-old Travis Kelce that is a really good tight end. You need to have playoff success, and again, you're making the playoffs every single year, having these long runs. You're going to need some rest when it comes to the end of the NFL season. So knowing those statistics proven to be true in 2023, we look at the season we just finished, a bit of a similar story. We see Noah Gray get the most usage he ever has and the most tight end 2 usage behind Travis Kelce the Chiefs have had in a very long time. He's seeing 50% of the snaps behind Travis Kelce consistently. That's a little bit of a red flag as far as his usage goes. In the playoffs, he will, yes, 100% get used and probably still be good and drive his fantasy value back up again, but Kelce's still a dominant, important player to this offense. Teams know that. They make sure he is out of these games and take him out of the equation, and those things are not going to change. He's going to be drafted as a top 3 tight end next year. I almost guarantee it. It doesn't matter because of his name value, even if he plays bad in the NFL playoffs. I'm just not willing to take that high of a draft capital pick with Travis Kelce next year, especially if you compare him to the wide receivers, putting up drastically different numbers at that ADP. If you put Kelce's 2024 last season fantasy statistics in wide receiver terms, he's the wide receiver 26, right behind Nico Collins, despite being drafted in the first round. The payoff just doesn't make sense there. I'd rather either get a Brock Bowers or just wait and play the gamble with the tight end position. But that is going to finish off this video. Let me know who are you avoiding next season in the fantasy football drafts, but I will see you in the next one coming very soon this week. All glory to the man above.